And thank everybody for coming to this. I think it's the 12th Futures of Design Education, and it's featuring the newest member of the Education SIG of the DRS, Yashar Kardar. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, Yashar, but it's going to be on the topic of design literacy. Again, what I think it is around about sort of exploring the boundaries of design and where we've kind of gotten to and where we might be going over the next sort of few years with that. But I'll let Yashar introduce that. Our next event is on, I'll need to dig out the date, but it's going to be Keith Sawyer has just confirmed that he's going to be doing the next one. So Keith Sawyer is quite a well-known researcher in creativity, and he comes from an educational background, and he's been moving over into sort of studio practice recently. So that's going to be on the 18th of February. Keith takes quite a, what shall we say, oh, that's excellent. Take a bit more of a sort of scholarly or strictly scholarly approach to design education. So I thought it might be useful to maybe have a look, because I know we have talked in the past about, if you like, our own scholarly or sort of research credentials as design educators. So I'm hoping that that discussion next month might be sort of along those lines. Looking into the future, we're hoping that Juha Hartvig from Finland might be in March, and possibly Ishan Koshla might be in April. These are all to be confirmed yet, but that's on the sort of horizon. So it's kind of sounding like we've got some interesting speakers, and Byron has just very kindly sort of messaged me a contact from, I can't remember, is it? I can't remember, what institution did you say?
Sorry, I just closed the window.
Oh, sorry. What institution is McGanry from?
So it was first Botswana University, then
okay.
India National Institute of Design,
okay,
then
cool.
BOTEC in Botswana, and then Cape Peninsula University of Technology in Cape Town. And now he's back at in Nairobi. I'm not sure which university he's currently at. I think it might be in that article I just sent you.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to try to chase up McGendy and see if we can perhaps nobble him for a future series. But as I say, there's quite a few talks coming up, and from different like places and spaces in the world as well, which again is the whole point of what we're trying to do with, you know, the plural of futures of design education here. So anyway, that, as I say, that date, the next one is the 18th of February. So if you want to stick that in your diaries, and as I say, I'll try to make the dates of the other events available as soon as we've got those finalised. But in the meantime, today's speaker is Yashar Kardar, and I'll just let you introduce yourself, Yashar. And again, it's kind of more of an informal discussion this session as well. So please feel free, once Yashar's, I think you've got a bit of a short presentation, a bit of a sort of proposition or provocation, and then we'll have a bit of a chat after. Does that sound okay? Cool. Over to you then. Go for it, Yashar.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to start with a small music, if it's okay, and then continue on the presentation. Maybe we can have a very short chat while it's being played. I don't know if you can hear it. Does it come? Okay, perfect. Just going to reduce the volume. Do you know, like, have you heard this before, or do you know who it is from?
No, it's quite quiet, Yashar.
I can increase the...
No, I don't recognize it, no.
During the song. That's the good idea. Now, it's not an advert. Actually, this song the music that you just listened to is generated by AI. And this is like part of the topic that is happening right now. So it's an art piece or a form of creation that's been done with AI. Also, this image that you're seeing is also designed by AI. So visual, vocal, and this is also a combination of both of them. It's basically the whole like setup is all done by AI again. Visuals, everything that you like see here, like it goes on and like it's all these different transitions. And so it's completely generated. I'm going to I'm just going to keep this very short. So the first part of this is actually like a lot of, I'm not by practice a designer, but I'm a design graduate. And the reason that also like we had this very fun discussion with Derek over the LearnX Design conference is I see a lot of technologies that are being coming out in the next 10, 15 years are coming up. And the whole topic of today was actually based on how these are commodifying not just design, but design practice itself, and how easy it is to do things that we call right now as design, and how it is pushing designers to do other things that maybe are not exactly design. And so the first stage of it is that to be creative, to create something is becoming commodified. And in the second stage is that normally we think, okay, when I want to create something, when I want to generate an idea, I have to think about possibilities, about what could be. And that's also something that is increasingly going to be done. Even right now, based after you train a machine, it can predict after seeing maybe the first 2 frames that the third frame is going to be a kiss. It's going to be a handshake. It's going to be 2 people hugging each other. It's going to be someone running. It doesn't matter, but it's that the point is that it's starting to predict, so we can make guesses on what new ideas could do. So prediction is becoming commodified as well. And last stage, this is not very new. It's from 2017. But product design as a physical, creating physical objects is becoming commodified too. It can be generated completely automatically at this moment. And depending on how much information is available about materials, about sources that can be used in that production line, having completely personal, completely customized, completely generated products basically is possible now. So product design is becoming commodified too. And this is something that we'll probably see come to mainstream in the next 10 to 15 years, even though it is at an experimental level right now. But when you bring this, at least from my own perspective, these things that I'm showing, these are completely conversations that I have maybe mostly by thinking about what I studied, what I understood, and then what I'm doing right now. So the process of designing something new usually goes from collecting information, understanding it, framing it, creating assumptions and predictions on how it can become together or what it could be, and then putting those predictions and choosing between them and mix and matching and coming to a final solution and actually building it and making it, bring it to physical form, digital form, social form, or another way of existence. And why this is happening, there's another change that has happened over the last maybe 20 to 30 years. When the first the Industrial Revolution and all these happened, when a new innovation was coming to market, the impact that it would have would take much more time to happen, and it would have a much smaller impact by coverage, basically. But right now, we're at a position that maybe just by push of a button by company like Apple, Google, you can have complete change of a product and experience, or a new way of behaving with objects and anything that is around us, have widespread application all over the world, maybe in matter of hours or seconds. So we're at a point that everything is so connected that like the technological change for the first time is happening so fast that we cannot experience what's exactly happening and then decide on how to behave towards it, which also comes to the things that you've been seeing about fake news, about how elections are being influenced by the way that algorithms and services are organizing information that you're watching on social media, Google and different places, and so many other stuff that's like it's not visible and you don't see them. Now, the thing that's for me personally, at least this is how I frame it for myself. Usually, like when you're designing small stuff, like when you design one or two objects, like it can be considered as crafts. And as industrial design, like stage by stage, what I've understood from what's happened is that, well, first was ceramics that was being done as crafts and then become industrialized. It became commodified. Now then we started having products, and then while we're having products, the production of them, the expansion of them, and like how they're done, the design thinking and similar stuff to that is being commodified again too. And now the last stage is the macro stage, which just comes to like systems, policies, and which make everything much more complicated and require much more disciplines than just design to happen, even more than before, with a very intangible, like entangled relationship that complicates it creates ramifications of every small decision. So like every small decision that can be made in a room can have an impact on 100 millions of people in matter of seconds to days, which makes this whole thing very scary. And this is sort of means that like what is told as design practice and what design is and how it's done, it itself is going through a commodification stage, which pushes it to build a new kind of relationship, first with other disciplines, with itself and how it's being done and by who it's being done. So in a way that, for example, like right now, if you're a designer, you want to do something that would influence social behavior of people, just a like 1-year project, 6-month project is not exactly enough to understand the complexity of these situations and these contexts. And just by knowing about how design is being done, it's also not enough to be able to make decisions that would improve things, which is, I think, at core what we try to do, to make things better for both people or environment or everything around it. So it becomes like makes it very complicated. So designers that come out, they have to either learn a lot about other disciplines and then combine these to be able to proceed, which, for example, is the case that happened to me, or they're pushed down to stay at a like much smaller level and on a practical and more of an operational level, which means that, for example, running Rhino, Autodesk, or using these tools basically to do the decisions that have already been made by someone else. So considering this and how this like mix of like what we do normally with these other disciplines, it can have a good side. So we are getting information from other disciplines more than ever before. And there's a lot of opportunities to bring back these, like how design thinking was being used by other disciplines and then being distributed and the way that they like apply it. It's reverse of it can happen right now too. So like information that is in other fields can come inside design much easier and much faster right now. Now, the bad part of it is that with this kind of a cross-disciplinary approach, or like by mixing all these boundaries of like what is like which part is what actually we do or what are we commodifying right now, and how it influences basically how does it influence like design education itself and design as a discipline? Where do you put the boundaries or lines of like, okay, this is what we do and this is not what we do, and this is what we should learn and this is not what something that we should learn, when in the middle of this whole mess, basically. And so, yeah, basically, like, what would be the core things that we have to keep a level of integrity? And like the things that we consider like, or what we call as design literacy right now, would it be relevant with all these changes maybe in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, for example? So basically the whole concept of today, like the reason that with Derek decided like to do this is that I'm not an expert in design. So anything that I said is purely on my personal observations of the designers that I've been seeing that they're practicing design in different ways, and what I've been hearing and reading. So, and I'm sure in like by topic wise and the words that I use and the terms and everything, you have a much better perspective maybe. And this discussion is basically what we're bringing up is that, what do you think about this? Like, how do you see this disciplinary diffusion, and how this automation is basically leaving designers that are no just operations of product design out of jobs for the future generations? So what would be the alternative that they could have, and how could this alternatives and creation of these alternatives and opportunities be more possible in the education system?
Cool. Thank you, Yashar. Right. Okay, so we're not talking about a small subject here then. This is excellent. We're right in there. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Yashar. That was really interesting. I particularly liked the confluence of emerging technologies with the question of like what's the boundaries or what's the kind of edges, if you like, of design. That's an interesting way of approaching it. There's a really nice book by Stanislav Dehaene, I think his name is, looking at machine learning and human cognition, and he kind of uses a similar type of thing, not saying that there's a kind of relation between these, but from what we've learned in this domain and what we've learned in this domain, it actually kind of helps you reflect on what it is that's valuable about human cognition, and what it is we know, and more importantly, how ignorant we are of certain things in it as well. So yeah, interesting. Right, before we maybe kick off into a discussion, and before anybody launches in, or if anybody does want to launch in, that's fine too. Does anybody want to sort of ask any questions or any clarifications or any sort of points on the presentation itself?
I'll ask for a couple of definitions.
Go for it.
So this is, maybe I'm actually launching all the way into it then. Can you define design for me in the context in which you're using it? Because I would hazard to say that, and I think we need to step back maybe slightly, that the way we're conceptualizing this very big woolly thing called design doesn't actually exist. And so I actually think in some ways you're talking about industrial design, which is an applied discipline, which uses aspects at a larger scale of design processes or sequences of thinking patterns that we call design thinking, right? But in this case, it'd be really, really useful, because what you're doing is that you're setting up a series of relationships between disciplines where one of those disciplines is actually not defined, which makes it very difficult to have a conversation, right? So we know what industrial engineering is, we know what medical research is, but when you say design, I actually don't know what you mean by that.
And maybe just to give a quick sort of analogy of this, I mean, this is a non-trivial, there's not necessarily an answer you can give that will satisfy here, by the way, Yashar, first of all. Second of all, I'll give you a quick example of this. It's like saying science is a discipline, and that, say, changes in chemistry and biochemistry in this particular subdiscipline, and comparing that subdiscipline to science, it's kind of almost not meaningful, if that makes sense. So I guess that's maybe the kind of question, if we've got this vague thing called design, but we also have this thing called product design, are these commutable in any kind of sense? Is that a sort of translation, Philip?
Yeah, no, right. We have an informational hierarchy issue where we're actually talking about two different things on two completely different scales that don't have the relationships that we're trying to discuss. That's all. And I mean, I work in cognitive processes, semantics, and methodologies. So obviously, I'm going to bring my own bias into this, and I'm interested in cognitive structures. So, and I have a very, very clear opinion about design, which Derek knows about, and we talk about quite a lot. So.
Yep, definitely a loaded question. But it is a relevant one, and it is a,
Yes.
yeah, it's the relevant question, yeah.
I think it's because I come from industrial design background, the way that I'm defining design here is that process of, I mean, it's basically like this small diagram that I showed, like collecting information, making meaning out of information, framing it, and then creating a solution or an output from those information. Now, so this can be industrial design, product design, social design, graphic design, but it's definitely not design used in mechanical engineering or scientific sense.
Yes, it is. If I was doing medical research looking at enzymes, I would do exactly the same process.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry,
no,
and this is a sticking point, right? Because we're using very, very fluffy terms to claim ownership or territory over something which isn't claimable. These are human interactions, these are human behaviors, these are humans' abilities, and they occur in every process, in every moment of every day. So if we're claiming territory for design, which I'm not sure is even possible, I at least like to know what the boundaries of that are. So and you're absolutely right, that process does exist, but I can apply that process to getting up and choosing a pair of shoes. Yes. It's the same process, right? I get up, I collect information, I think about my day, I think about where I'm going, I'm thinking about what the weather might be like. I have a selection of objects in front of me. I then do a synthesis, right? Divergent, convergent thinking. I then make a selection and I choose a pair of shoes that are going to work for me for the day. That's a design process. Is it applied to professional design disciplines? No, right? So in this case, I think we actually have to have a conversation about what that boundary is, because we're going to start making claims that are not defensible.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Derek, I jumped into it.
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm going to pull back from it, but not for those reasons, because I think this is absolutely, I mean, this is almost, and it is an ontological argument or a philosophical argument in some ways. But one response to it would be, not to divert it, but I think it's another important thing. It's, as you said, about making the claims about it. People are making those claims, and they are selling those claims, and they are doing stuff with those claims all the time. They're doing it politically, economically. We're doing it in the academy. We're doing it in colleges and schools to create new curriculum. So I'm wondering whether or not there's a value in, and maybe we could come back to this, unless anybody wanted to continue the ontological thing. I'm more than happy to keep going with that, because I think you can take Philip's pair of shoes example, and I think you can build on that and actually still create intermediate foundational steps that do become atoms, if you like, of design, or they get closer to design. But you still have to be aware of the fact that you're discussing it at an abstract level across.
I mean, I can counter my own argument too by saying I could actually write an algorithm that would select those shoes for me, right? But I can't write an algorithm that does what I do as a designer yet.
But what you might be able to do, and this is where I'm talking about with in terms of boundary making and who claims those boundaries, what you would be doing to create that algorithm is setting the boundaries of that algorithm. So you're already taking the design step prior to the design actually happening, if that makes sense. So it's that case of your judgment. And this is where I think design is slightly different. It's an aspect of judgment. So there's not a subjectivity, but there's a kind of, there's a bit of an ecology of thinking that kind of, but this is getting really quite reified and philosophical. I don't want to necessarily take it in that direction if people don't want to, but that boundary making, that who gets to decide these boundaries, I do think is quite an important discussion.
And that is
regardless of the truth. Sorry, yeah, let me go.
But to a level of it is a question as like my question as well, because like when you talk about an algorithm and choosing your shoes and deciding which one to choose and go. So right now that like, I'm talking about design practice, by the way, like while mentioning of like this whole designing thing, talking about this design thing, I'm talking about typical person that becomes a design professional and then goes and works into projects that, and they have to like do research on like what are the user needs or like whatever, and then continue to make some assumptions on what is that we're responding to, what do we need to change, and then come up with ideas and then apply them. Maybe by boundaries, like it could be extended to like, okay, physical environments that this being done, digital environments that this being done. So like that's how I would go, like social boundaries, like environments that it's being done. So it goes like into product design and graphic design and those, but I'm specifically talking about professional practice of industrial design and design. Like, because you're by the way, the questions that you're asking are very correct and very important. And like setting the boundaries at the beginning is very good and helpful for the conversation, because like the point that I'm coming from, at least personally, and is that I studied design, but I never designed a single product. But I've been creating social systems for organizations to collaborate with each other. I have been creating social structures for people basically building communities, and then also went through and saw the implementation as well and like managed them as well. And like it's an area, and I'm into entrepreneurship, so like that's also like another field that's good there. And while doing this, I do use knowledge from my undergraduate and graduate studies, but I increasingly see like the tools that I learned to use, I don't use them. So the kind of situations that I get into, for example, we're deciding on whether a product is good for people or not. The kind of tools and methodologies that I use, a lot of them come from, and validation methods like come from marketing and like business administration, maybe sociology. So, and they're not from my discipline, but they're the ones like bringing them in have become the things that are creating impact or value or in the field that I'm working. And like, I mean, we had this conversation with Eric, and so for me, the way that this come up, like I see the technologies, I see the changes that they're like creating, and I see industrial design graduates trying to find jobs, trying to get into jobs, but like they end up doing graphic design, or they end up making posters and things like that, because they can't go a stage above, because they need knowledge of other disciplines to be able to go there and become a decision maker, and or they need time to get a more like vertical experience and knowledge about that field. So this sort of brought the question of like, if this trend continues, and where does this go? And like the more these design tools or like this reliance of me creating a new object or an artifact would make me a designer, the more it is taken from me, then what is it that I'm holding on to as a discipline? And what is it that should be held on to as a discipline? This
is almost swinging to the opposite end of the argument, which might be that if we then define design as a contextually applied praxis, that comes from either a professional setting, a commercial setting, or a cultural setting, it is that thing that is consistently applied in that way that people just collectively roughly call architecture or product design or whatever it is. And what you're asking now, Yashar, is, well, if in that product design cluster, in that praxis, if what they are doing is now happening so fast. And Colin Gray did research into this with early user interaction design. Don't want to trigger you there, Philip, with the UX thing. It was user interaction, very specifically. Computer interaction. That basically the emerging field of sort of interaction, it was changing so quickly that, if you like, these communities of practice, you know, the thing that sticks a community together, that kind of replicability, or not replicability, but that transmission, if you like, of common things started to break down, and it actually broke into different communities with very different, almost like philosophies and beliefs and cultures. So is that what you're kind of almost saying, that there's this opposite end of the argument, that design is this exceptionally applied thing, and that yes, we might have these artificial labels like product design, but what's actually happening over here is commodity design or economic commodity design. What's happening over here is actually craft-based local design or some other suitably thing. So again, it's almost the opposite question. At what point does this become so specialized and reified that you basically need a word for every single designer who is working as a design discipline? Do you see what I mean? Opinions. Are we going too deep today? Do we need to pull back to the shallow end?
No, I don't want it just to be a conversation between the three of us. And so,
yeah, jump in. Somebody else, break us up. Byron, you had your hand up. I don't know if you're still listening.
Sorry, the conversation moved on, but it was actually your point about an ontology. And I uploaded a paper by Max Neer, which is the Foundations of Transdisciplinarity. I found it a very useful paper where it's not so much focusing on a discipline, it's actually focusing on the abstractness of the problem and how those problems are actually requiring people to go across quite major boundaries of knowledge, if you like, to actually resolve it. So you're either finding intersections of disciplines, so if it's biology and art, for instance, by intersecting two very different views of the world, you can actually solve a problem in a different way. I just uploaded that paper because I think part of what you're talking about is trying to understand what is the responsibility of a discipline. And I think the world has moved on from that, in a sense, that it's more of how do we understand problems in different ways, and what skills, what abstraction is needed to actually address that. Very good paper. I've got some other ones if that resonates with you. But the other thing to look at is I think it's still going. At Harvard, there was a art science lab, and they were trying to look at problems in a different way. And one came into practice, which was looking at entertainment and sustainability. And the students came up with a soccer ball, as you kick it, it actually generates electricity. The ball ended up being called socket. So it was a practical way of trying to intersect getting kids involved with sustainability, but actually generating it as they're learning. Other one which came up was inhalable chocolate. So you don't get all the problems from eating chocolate, but you get the sensation. And then that starts dealing with a whole other field of perceptions and bodily image and so on. Yeah, I think that was really just my contribution, that paper helped me navigate this very, very rocky road which you started on.
Yeah. Well, and I can easily bring this back into an educational setting, and what you're talking about is absolutely important. It's absolutely critical, because it's going to start affecting our programs in a serious way. And maybe if I'm going to deal with, maybe I'll move from ontology to epistemology. I also think we've got another issue where we conflate the word design with the word creativity, which are absolutely not the same processes at all. I can design lots of things. I don't actually have to be creative to design them. Right. And so, and when we talk about creativity, we also have to then start breaking that down and talk about what we mean by that. But when we move into an educational setting, I run 5 programs. I run graphic design, industrial design, transportation design, game design, and interior design. And then the sister program in my college is architecture. And so I've got 6. I've got almost all of them. what we're finding, and I run first year foundational studios where, and we base our education is all based on design thinking. We actually teach them how to think, reason, research, acquire information, make judgments. We don't teach them how to make stuff to start with. We teach them how to think. The struggles that we have is that we are absolutely set up on outcomes. And the minute somebody's doing a poster, like you say, versus making a product versus making a space, they think that the other stuff's not relevant to them. And so and what's really interesting is that I'm having a parallel struggle in something that I didn't expect, which is software 3D modeling education. Because, and this is a really weird parallel, and I actually hadn't really thought about it until we started talking here. But in the 3D modeling, I'm actually experimenting because we have so many programs. Every discipline chooses their own software. They all do the same thing, right? Like Alias, Maya, Blender, 3ds Max, right? Rhino, they all do the same things. They all do them slightly differently. I start thinking about those things as being territories of knowledge, right? They've got ideologies connected to them. They're very much like nuances, like elements within a discipline where they're applied aspects of a larger discipline, not that much different to the same structure that we have. And the struggle we have is that I can teach the large scale principles of, say, you know, what a sub-D versus what's a NURB system is. And every one of those softwares will do it, but they will all do it slightly differently. And coming out of that area, what has been shown through the research is that the easiest way to develop an education within a system like that is not to sample across. So if I wanted to learn this stuff, I wouldn't sample across 5 or 6 different types of software. You give a student a very, very deep dive in one software package. And once they have expertise in that software package, the possibility of crossing over to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different softwares that are related is 100% easier. But if they float across and they're learning a little bit of Maya, a little bit of Blender, a little bit of Max, they'll be screwed up for the rest of their lives. If I bring that back into our area, right, and we're talking about application of professional design disciplines, which is, to me, not the same. Design doesn't exist. It's a very nice fluffy idea, but it's like science or art. It's a very, very large meta containers that the definition changes because it's completely contextual. So there's no point having a conversation about it. But if we talk about, as we do, and we are moving towards transdisciplinary, we are moving towards projects that are requiring multiple different points of view involved to be successful. To me, the approach that is actually to pull back into very clear disciplinary boundaries, educate very deeply in those boundaries, at the same time as holding an attitude that there is equal value in every parallel discipline, which is a juggling act, right? Because we are, as humans, territorial. All right.
That almost, well, it doesn't mirror, but I think Leslie Ann sort of hints at that depth of needing the disciplinary contextualized design knowledge so that you can then start the conversation about pulling back and then reapplying into other contexts.
Right, because I'm fighting at an academic level, I'm fighting that a generic design degree in an undergraduate is completely stupid, right? You don't want those until you hit a graduate level. Undergraduate is a very deep dive into a very particular topic where those skills get developed. And once you have expertise, you move into trans and cross-disciplinary situations.
Yep, exactly. So we'll need to have a chat sometime about how we are about on the but it's the same principle. We are having to do that in order to come back out. But I'll let somebody else jump in if anybody else wanted to contribute. That's a really interesting thing. And I think that is an analogy between the tools we use. A tool is another way of claiming territory. As you say, John, territory is definitely a good word here. And we've had exactly the same issues with software. Also from practice as well. I've worked in lots of different practices, lots of slightly different nuances, and man, the tribes, whether you're a MicroStation, or used to be MicroStation or Autodesk, AutoCAD sort of user compared to a lot of the BIM solutions that are available now in architecture, It is a very tribal thing. And underlying this, I strongly believe, is this territorial stuff that's happening. Again, I would kick back, Philip, again, not because I disagree with you on the design doesn't exist. Ontologically, I probably agree with you, but people still talk about it. Therefore, it still kind of exists because people, it's like design thinking. You and we all probably have a very shared understanding of quite a subtle and probably powerful conception of what design thinking is. But as long as there are snake oil salespeople out there saying, nah, design thinking is like 2 diamonds on a donut or whatever it is, design thinking will still exist as that other object. It's still a problem. So we still need tools to talk about that other, anyway, but that's a bit of an aside. Did anybody want to talk about that kind of the territorial thing or getting down to the specificity, like the tools as markers of, because it struck me as well, Philip, that when you were talking about that, the software, and basically it's one step from Revit into Grasshopper into procedural algorithms, you know, the AI is going to be the same. The AI that you choose will be the territory, and that will be decided by other people. Already in Revit and BIM, for example, Autodesk's version of it, the tools that are given to me automatically start to shape the way that I think. I've spent a lot of time trying to break people out of that thinking, but it happens. Sorry, I'm prattling on to one. Did anybody else want to come in? Sorry.
Yes, please. I'm interested.
Go for it, Ahmed.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm seeking for advice. My bachelor was in mechanical engineering, and now I'm pursuing my master's in product design. And actually, I'm interested in computational design, but I see industrial designers around me are more tended to human-centered design, not design driven by data. Like we draw normally on like Rhino or I don't know, Maya, but they don't use data in their designs like architects. So I'm a little bit struggling to develop in this field. So I would like to hear more advices about that if I want to choose this as a discipline.
Yashar, do you want to respond to that, or is that maybe a bit too specific for?
A bit too specific. I think if it'd be better if you intervene.
Okay, well, it's maybe something we can take somewhere else, Ahmed, in some ways, because I mean, if I understood you correctly, it's about the application of something very specific in a context. Is that, or if I misunderstood? Sorry.
Yeah, it's like I'm a little bit seeking for advice for a certain deep down in computational design, for example, as a discipline, but I don't find, I don't know, the support of this in the field of product design.
Okay, I don't know, does anybody else have any, and particularly in product design, any suggestions? I don't know, John, is this maybe around your area perhaps slightly? Or am I putting you on the spot there, John? Sorry.
You totally put me on the spot there, David. Computational design, me?
Okay, fair enough.
I think it's a great question, but maybe it kind of does resonate with the conversation that's been had already about the territories. You know, I draw pictures for a living and make, you know, I was trying to make bits of wood look like bits of plastic because I was an industrial design student. And it's great that we've moved on from spray paint and blue foam. That was my training. So where the whole conversation around industrial design, product design, design discipline, design practice, what feeds into that, what the boundaries of the, you know, what do we have to have as a mindset? What do we have to use as a central skill set? Flipping heck, it's a brilliant conversation. But yeah, but it's not my field.
Delivered wonderfully, a perfect accent for that delivery as well, Julian. Absolutely brilliant. I do wonder as well, Ahmed. I mean, just to generalize the question slightly, I mean, we could maybe have a specific discussion about that. We could maybe reach out to members to look at your specific ask. But just to generalize it slightly, what I'm wondering about is the point at which I, as a designer, so say I'm designing a building, I've popped into Revit, I want to do something funky with the shape, I've set up a procedural net, and then I'm going to start to play with that shape and actually start to set up some stuff. And I might even like do a bit of AI responding to certain, I don't know, say I'll pick up some, I'm going to use rude words. No, I better not use rude words. I'll be very, as I was as a student, I'll use some kind of really stupidly clever but obscure reason to get the AI to propagate some shape generating maths. Again, I suppose my question is, at what point am I still the designer making judgment? At what point have I devolved that? It's almost like Philip said, that difference between creativity and design. If we're not having that conversation as well, never mind some of the others. So this is never mind the is design a thing conversation. We've got a whole bunch of messy, vague blobs inside that design thing, like creativity, like what design is, like what professionalism is inside that discipline that we haven't even sorted out. So at what point am I not being creative? At what point am I just being a designer and using the tool as a tool? At what point am I using it as something that I should be worried about or something that I shouldn't be worried about? See, any and all of these questions, that to me is where design as a discipline does become quite important. And these are, and arguably they still apply to other disciplines, so Philip's criticism still applies, that facility to be ethically, critically and morally engaged with those feckin' questions of what it is I'm doing and the consequences of that in the real world are still absolutely as relevant. And they have to be incorporated into the design process. Again, that's, for me personally, that's something that you absolutely inject into students, but making them see that in the first place, and it goes back to Philip's point again, that making them see that by using the tools and then seeing the consequences of those tools as opposed to the consequences of other things, that's the important bit. It's not just about training one line, it's actually about the facility to see parallel things. And still yet, we still have got no reliable computational analogies for human cognition. We still don't, and that's just simply because there are quantum processes that still take place across neurons. It's still too complex to map properly. So there is still a fundamental difference, if you want to think of it informatically, between these two processes that hasn't been sufficiently either theorized or analyzed, to be quite honest with you. But again, that's maybe a bit too of a rarefied position, sorry. So anyway, what's interesting there is maybe the general question is, if you're sitting there, is something like AI a tool that gets applied to a discipline or within a discipline, and does it only have meaning within that sub-discipline, that very specific setting? Or is there something in the tool themselves that sits outside that that's of greater concern, or is that too weird a question? Are we back to making timber look like plastic again? Sorry. Yashar, did you want to? I mean, I presume you've been playing with this, Yashar. I mean, even what you were talking about earlier, the notion of using algorithms, no matter what you say, there's still an influencing behavior that's happening with that, isn't there? There's still something that's making change in the world.
Actually, I mean, coming to the comment, like text that John just wrote in the chat as well. Like, so here's the thing that I'm seeing, at least in the field right now, generative tool, like maybe not in the specific design industry or practice, the tools that we are currently using are not doing that, but generative tools that make decisions and make judgments and make changes on the fly exist right now. And because they exist, they are actually shaping experiences and products. Mm-hmm. In real time, by the way. Like,
so, but hang on, I think the question here is, like, let's go back to that piece of music and to the piece of art that was created. The question then becomes, this is getting right back to 1980s death of the author argument stuff in theory, late 20th century theory, sorry. But the question is, what was the design there? Is the design the artifact, the piece of music, or is the design the intention behind that artifact, the change that it causes? It's that kind of secondary thing. You know, in some ways I'm ambivalent, you know, I'm going to be dead soon. So in some ways I can, you know, just say, sack it. It doesn't really matter whether we're living in a simulation or reality. I don't care. Pass me the beer. But if this stuff is to matter, then it's our decision to make it matter, if that makes any kind of sense.
I think Philip,
that was a bit deep, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to extend Derek's, where it's, you know, for me, because I don't design music, that piece of music is to me just simply an object, and the design act is me deciding the context in which I'm going to put it and all of the associations connected to it. And so, you know, we can also have another big conversation about craft and application. A lot of this to me comes down to starting state, right? Because we speak about these systems as if they're autonomous, and they're not. We speak about them as if they're acontextual, and they're not, right? And it's one of the most critical aspects that, you know, when we work in professional design situations is really setting up that brief, is setting up that starting state, and then selecting the tools. In this case, AI is just simply another tool. It's still being applied to a context which has supervisory attention by a human designer, right? Until we start getting into sentient and self-aware systems, and at that point we're in a whole different conversation, and we're all dead, and that's done. It's over, because I come out of the 1980s and 90s as well, so it's all Terminator and Skynet and Matrix, and we're finished, right? But in some ways, I think we should be having conversations which are not so much about this large scale discussions about, you know, the ethics, ontology, and epistemology of sentient systems, but the variations and differences and the nuances of them as applications of tools, right? In the same software conversation, you know, when I would use Revit versus Rhino versus Max versus Maya versus Blender, they're actually all different situations. And I have a whole secondary list of stuff. You know, if I go Fusion, when would I use Fusion 360 versus AutoCAD? Completely different situations. Who decides that? Not the AI and not the computer. They may suggest, but there's always that human decision making. We know that when we start looking at even the way industry's going, the way job placements are going, what's getting automated and what's not getting automated. Those nuanced decision-making positions will be the last things to go, right? And to me, that is the realm that, and I'm gonna contradict myself again, because I'm going to use the word designers. And designers to me is I would define it as a fairly particular orientation to a cognitive process that allows the sequence of relationship between data collection and data application, right? It happens a lot it happens in every discipline, but when we educate professional designers, we focus on that, and it is an absolute skill that we develop consciously. Where a lot of other disciplines, they actually don't develop it consciously, or they do it, but they do it by default. For us, that's a territory of education that we do that nobody else does. Is it found everywhere else? Yes. But and the other analogy I like to use is running, because we all know how to run, but we're not all professional athletes. And so what is it like? The skill and the knowledge you need to be a professional runner is really different to somebody who goes out every weekend for like 2 miles, right? In the same way that we heighten that design process to a level much, much, much higher than what anybody else does. And we have both knowledge, skills, visibility of those processes. We can have discussions about those processes in a very, very precise way that no other discipline does, right? And in that case, design in this case, and I mean that if we're going to claim that as a territory, and I don't believe it's a discipline, but it is a territory of knowledge, and those are different again. And then they get applied into our disciplines. But industrial design, graphic design, they're all struggling right now because those boundaries are vanishing. Like a product will include 5 different disciplines at the same time to bring it to outcome now, right? Spatialized knowledge, graphic interface knowledge, game process knowledge, physical fabrication knowledge, all of those things are within different disciplines, and they all come together. But
I have a question. Yeah. So if we were going to use AI as a tool, like if you think of AI as a tool, now we have which is also the thing that bugs me. So with Rhino, you think about creating something, and then you operate this like tool, and then you create it, and then you submit it, you send it, or you produce it, like with this next processes that come on after that. But with AI as a tool, you are deciding on these intentions in the beginning, and then after that, you're directly pushing it out. Then it starts doing it, or like if the engineer that is like making it happen. But on the part of like how it's being used and how it implements, like for example, with the fake news, like the thing that is triggering there is actually because algorithms become super personalized for every person on how they use social media. They show them more of what they like, and then because they show them more of what like, we have this polarization problem that's happening in different countries. And then so in there, for the designer to be able to make judgments on this kind of like how to use this tool, or what boundaries or parameters to put for this tool, maybe just like that process wouldn't be enough, because this, like for example, polarization of society, like how many designers or design students are aware of these practitioners? I mean, like because people here
Yashar, you still there?
yes, I started reading in the chat to be able to catch up at the same time. Sorry.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I mean, it is, well, I'm going to say it's an emerging field. Some would claim that it is an emerging field in design, that information design and actually working as an algorithmic designer is a thing. And again, I would point back to Philip's point there. Well, certainly personally speaking, that the thing that's missing, and again, this goes back to Christopher Alexander and his keynote speech to computing scientists, and telling them that there's absolutely no way that they are designers because they don't and they cannot give a crap about ethics, because they are not in the business of producing ethics, unless they change to become designers, in which case they're doing a different thing. And that's an interesting inflection, and it kind of works inside the space that you were talking about, Philip, but also hints of what you're referring to, Yashar, as well. It's at what point are you just engineering something? Are you just doing something without any reference to the context, the consequences, or the sort of, and again, that's all the stuff that I would agree with Philip on this. This is, to me, this is why I would claim, yeah, for once, I'll pay you later. This is why I would claim that we can teach design in a general sense, is that those specialist cognitive skills of being able to almost look at yourself, look at the objects that you produce, look at the things in context, and put all of that stuff together, that suite of, if you like, an ecosophy, an ecological philosophy of thinking, that is unique to a designer. Because we say it is. End of story. That's it. That's all it takes. It's, once again, it's another Philip Plowright quote. It's really simple. It's not complex. But anyway, that's, yeah. Right. Okay. I'm very conscious of the fact that it's 1 o'clock and we haven't solved this problem. I'm really frustrated. Really frustrated. I thought we were going to get an answer today. There we go. Not to worry. Actually, there was a couple of really interesting directions here. There's a really couple of really some interesting like movings on, not just the same repetition of the same old crap, which is quite interesting. So thank you very much for that, Yashar. Did anybody want to say anything finally just before we sort of sign off? Anybody that hasn't spoken yet, maybe? No pressure though. Cool. Okay, we'll leave that today. As I say, the recording will be available soon. So yeah, please feel free to share it after the event. Yashar, I knew it was going to be an interesting one. I thought it was actually a really good discussion today. As I say, I thought there were some interesting threads that came out of it. Thank you very much, Yashar. That was really appreciated.
Thank you for tolerating this.
No, and it is a difficult area. I mean, honestly, the reason we didn't come up with any answers is that there are no answers to this. It is very much a contemporary and ongoing issue. So feel free to keep the conversation going. By the way, I'll maybe ask after I've stopped the recording if you could just hang on for 2 seconds. So thank you very much, everybody. As I say, the next session is, I should have kept that up. The next session is oh dear, I should get rid of it. 18th of February, Keith Sawyer. Hopefully we'll be talking about the studio model that has been developed. We'll be talking about all of his work on sort of rigorous approaches, if you like, to design education. another interesting and controversial challenge. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along today, and hope to see you at the next event. Thank you.
Awesome.